I imagine it's not something super easy to talk about. And we kind of talked the other day, and you had mentioned you don't like to dwell on this part of your life. It's not like what makes you you, right? But still, you chose to come and be on the show today. So I'm just wondering, like, why why was it important for you to tell your story?
So for me, it's something that I never really talked about with people that didn't already know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it first happened, everybody that wanted to talk to me about it already knew what had happened.
Mm.
And then nowadays, whenever I tell people about it in any sense, it's more of a, hey, this happened. Here's the short version. I'm good now. We're not going to worry about it. But now you're aware of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really tell them the whole story. And so I feel like this would just be a great way to just tell the whole story in a way that if people want to know it and I don't feel like talking about it in that moment, I can like direct them to this. Plus, I know it's going to reach a whole bunch of people that I will never meet myself.
Yes.
And that's going to be even better because it's something that, if it can help just one person, then that's worth it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing about suicidal thoughts is that we feel like we're alone, you know. And I think the most important thing to take away from this, in my perspective, is to understand that you're not alone. You know, those feelings that you feel are natural. And I had to learn that myself as I went through this process. That I'm not a bad person because I thought that I wanted to hurt myself. I had so much bottled up in me, like you with emotions, and we didn't know what to do with it. And it just kind of exploded. And I think that as we go on, you start revealing more and more of your story, but you kind of reference a void. Was that like him walking towards,
It's the call of the void.
The call of the void?
There's a French version of this that we could translate it, but
I don't know how to say it in French. I don't even know how it reads in French.
How did you first hear of this?
Just online internet browsing.
Okay.
I think it popped up on Reddit one day.
Okay.
And I was just like, oh, hey, that makes sense.
It resonated with you and stuck with you.
Cool. Okay, Zach, just take a moment. Before you talk about Brittany, I have a letter that your sister wrote, Brittany. She wrote a letter, and we're going to have Tiffany, your cousin, read it. And just so you guys know, Tiffany's father was Dan, and that is the uncle that we've been talking about here that passed away about 2.5 years prior to this event happening. So we're going to take the moment and allow Tiffany to read Brittany's letter that she wrote to you in the hospital, Zach.
Okay.
I think it's very heartfelt. So Tiffany, if you would read that for us.
All right. Dear Zach, on May 15th at approximately 4:55 p.m., I was about to leave work to go home. Mom called me telling me to get home to you right away. She said you were hurt and covered in blood but didn't know what was happening. My stomach dropped. I was terrified of what I was going to find when I got home. You had no idea the extent of what was going on. When I got to our street, Dad called me and told me to go straight to the emergency room. He quickly changed his mind and said, never mind, go straight home to see if Jim is still there, our neighbor. I asked what happened in his exact words, which still haunt me to this day, where Zach may have shot himself.
You can take your time.
Quickly, I raced home. The entrance to the neighborhood was flooded with police cars and fire trucks, all with their lights flashing. There was no easy way. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
There was no easy way to get into the driveway, so I parked my car by the neighborhood sign next to our neighbor's house. Immediately, I shut my car off and started running towards the police. Our neighbors and Laura, the girl that found you, were with them. You had left in the ambulance right before I arrived. Nobody knew what was really going on with you or where you were headed. Our neighbor Joe offered to take me to the hospital. There were rumors you were headed toward Vanderbilt, but we weren't sure. I called Hendersonville Hospital. They said you had arrived there, but were going to be life flighted to Vanderbilt from their helipad. When we got to the adult emergency room at Vanderbilt Hospital, Joe dropped me off and I ran inside. Quickly, a lady that I had never met before asked, "Are you Zach's sister?" It was Sandy, your boss. She said you hadn't arrived yet, so I sat down with her and another one of our bosses to wait, or one of your bosses to wait. I told them all I knew. All I knew was that you may have been shot. They couldn't believe it and started to deny it. The social worker came and got me, sat me down, and said you definitely have been shot and that it looked self-inflicted. They didn't know the extent of your injuries. They said you were rushed into surgery. You were in surgery for about 6 hours. They were having trouble getting you to stop bleeding. They said he lost a total of 8 units of blood. Just to put it in perspective, that's a little over 10 cans of Mountain Dew. Mom and Dad were in Destin, Florida with our friends the Tows at the time of your shooting. They immediately drove home as soon as they found out what happened. At a little after 1 a.m, you were done with your surgery. The security guard came downstairs, took me to the 10th floor conference room to talk to the doctors. There I sat, trembling uncontrollably, not knowing if you were going to be okay or not. Every scenario went rushing through my head. I had no idea if you were still alive or going to be. 3 doctors came to talk to me. They said the bullet entered underneath your chin and exited the top of your head just past your hairline. They said it hit the frontal lobe of your brain, which would affect your personality, comprehension, and memory, who you are. Basically, because they had trouble getting him to stop bleeding, they had to coil an artery from your groin to heat up the artery in your brain in order to stop the bleeding. Your jaw was broken, the roof of your mouth was damaged, your cheek was damaged, and all of your teeth had shifted. And there was a concussion from where he fell on the porch. Shortly after the doctors were done talking to me, one of the doctors got a call saying that Mom and Dad had arrived. The door opened and Mom flung herself into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad hugged me tight too, was sullen and calm, but you could tell he had been crying as well. Doctors gave them the news that they had told me, then they let us go see you. We walked into the ICU trauma unit where doctors and nurses were all around. When we saw you, you looked nothing like yourself. You were in a neck brace, your head was completely swollen. Both of your eyes were completely swollen shut and black. Your skin was all red and bruised. You had stitches where the bullet entered and exited. You were on a breathing tube. There was no movement. It was horrific seeing you that way. All 3 of us were there crying and talking to you and telling you how much we love you and we're praying for you. The doctors told us not to touch you because your skin is sensitive from the injuries. Mom held your hand anyways because she needed to touch you. All I wanted to do was curl up next to you, love on you, and tell you everything was going to be okay. Shortly after we got to see you, they rolled you away to get another scan on your brain. We had to leave. The first time I saw you, when you were awake, you looked the same. You could barely open your left eye, but you knew it was me. I held your hand and said, "I love you, Zach." And while squeezing my hand to the syllables, you mouthed, "I love you too," and nodded your head. The nurse had her phone laying next to your bed, playing Pandora. She had it on a station I knew you didn't like, so I asked if you wanted me to change it, and you said yes. I put it on classic rock, just like you like, and the first song that came on was "Sweet Child of Mine" by Guns N' Roses. I sat there, and while tears were streaming down my face, I sang it to you. I asked if you wanted me to pray with you, and you nodded, so I did. That was the first time in a very long time that I had prayed out loud. I will never forget that special moment we shared with each other for as long as I live. You may not realize it now, but God has had his hand on you through this whole situation. That bullet could have very easily killed you, and if it wasn't for work and Laura coming to check on you, you could have bled to death. God gave you a second chance, Zach. Already, I've seen the power of prayer and miracles happening with you every single day. God is the great physician, has had his hand on you this entire time. You have so many people praying for you, thinking about you, and lifting you up in spirit. So many people have come to visit you. You have a Facebook page called Friends of Zach Cole with over 670 likes. I've seen so many people become closer to God through you than I ever have before. God has huge plans for you. You are a walking miracle, and he is going to use you in more ways than one, giving hope to the hopeless, help to the helpless, faith to the faithless, and a witness of God's grace and mercy. I love you so much. You may not remember it, but I have been to the hospital to be with you as much as I can, and I will continue as long as you are there. Love, Brittany.
Wow. That was powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany, for reading that. Zach, how does that make you feel to hear that?
That brings up a lot of emotions I had forgotten about, because I read that letter when it was first made, which was almost 10 years ago now, and at the time I was getting so many letters and accountings from people that were so similar that it just kind of blended in with everything else and all just kind of blended together. But there were key parts of it I remember, like her telling of events and her comparing it to Mountain Dew, of all things, which I guess spoke to me at the time because it stood out in my memory. But yeah, that's powerful.
I know, Brittany's not here, but like, I wonder if you would respond to her after hearing that, or if there's anything that you'd want to say to her in this moment,
I mean, I've spoken to her a lot since then.
Yeah. Are you guys are still in touch then?
Yeah, as much as we can be. She doesn't really answer the phone anymore.
Siblings.
Yeah. But I mean, if she wanted to hear anything from me, mostly it's just, I love you, Brittany. Thank you so much for everything you've done during that time and during the time since.
So take us to the hospital. What do you remember first?
So the first thing I remember from being in the hospital was waking up, and this was, I had been there a few days at this point, based on what other people have told me. And the first thing I saw was my cousin Tiffany, and I looked around, kind of confused, as if it had all been a dream, and I asked what happened, and she responded very bluntly and said, "You shot yourself, dumbass." Which, it sounds harsh. She could have said harsher, but it was exactly what I needed to hear to let me know that it actually happened. It wasn't a dream, and that in a way I was in trouble. Because now I had to answer to everybody else about me actually doing it, instead of just being able to sweep it under the rug as if it hadn't actually happened and nobody knew. Because Tiffany lived 8 hours away in Missouri, so there's no way that she just happened to be there without having some time had passed.
And you didn't have a memory when you woke up of that happening. You remember
No.
What happened before.
I remember
considering
holding the gun, but I didn't remember actually putting it up to my chin the last time, or pulling the trigger, or anything that happened over the next few days.
so
All my
was
memories are secondhand from what people have told me.
Tiffany is kind of telling you what happened that made you actually realize that
Yeah,
it had happened.
Yeah, it cued me into the fact that it was real.
Nice.
And I hadn't imagined it.
So what I want to do is I'm going to stop you for a second. I'm going to change to Tiffany. So Tiffany, obviously your dad had a very strong impact on Zach's life. Could you kind of give us a small window of your dad, Dan? I know he was an amazing guy, and I know that was, one of your favorite people, just like it was with Zach.
My dad was a truly amazing man. Everyone he talked to, he left an impact on. He sold cable door to door. That was his last job, and he was one of those people who was so charming that he was literally selling cable to waitresses at restaurants he was sitting down and eating lunch in. He would sell to anybody. Our dentist, my bosses, everybody had bought cable through my dad, because once you met him, you loved him. He passed away very suddenly. Nobody saw it coming. I had spoken to him the night before on a Thursday night, and he'd been selling cable in a different town, so they'd been doing a lot more walking and door to door. I think that was hard on his body. But I woke up that Friday morning to a phone call from my mom telling me to get home. But to tell you how amazing of a man he was, it was very sudden. On a Friday morning, my sister and I put something on Facebook saying when the services were going to be, which they were going to be on Sunday, so 2 days later. And over 500 people showed up. Wow. There was no announcement in the newspaper or anything to that nature, because we didn't feel like it was worth paying the money, because we figured everybody would see it on Facebook at that time. And we were right. There were people who had to park in nearby business parking lots to try and go and be there for the memorial service. But he was just that kind of a man. Always funny, always looked on the bright side. If you needed advice in your life, he was that person. He was always there for all of us. He was the glue that held our family together. He was that guiding force. Yeah. And so it was a very hard time for all of us, including Zach, because he can talk more to that too, but Zach's parents, of course, his mom has a similar sense of humor to my dad and I, because we're all family, but she still is, slightly different. His dad is a hunter and a fisherman, and my dad and Zach and I were never that type. We're the nerdy, watching movies. My dad took Zach to see the new Star Trek movie in the IMAX, and it was just experiences with him that he could bond with my dad on a different level. Yeah. And part of that is my dad was super charming and amazing and funny, super funny. Yeah. And part of that was shared likes and interests. And so he was a special man.
So how did that make you feel when you received the phone call about Zach?
I will never forget the moment that I received the phone call about Zach. I was sitting in Applebee's eating dinner. And I never go to Applebee's, so that's kind of weird. But sitting in Applebee's eating dinner, and I got the phone call, Zach shot himself. And I said, what? Zach, cousin Zach? And they said, yes. And I said, oh no, is he okay? What's going on? Well, he's in the hospital. They life flighted him to Vanderbilt. We're all waiting. And that was one of the longest nights of my life, because we all sat and waited for news to make sure that he was okay. At that moment, though, my husband was out of town for work. He happened to be in Kentucky, so he was technically the closest family member to Brittany and Zach. Physically closest family member to Brittany and Zach. So I called my husband, and he was on a work project, so it was one of those, I didn't know if he could get away or what point they were in or what was going on, but I said, Colby, Zach has shot himself. Brittany has no other family with her in the hospital. Can you please go and be there with her? And he said, absolutely. Hung up the phone, talked to his boss. Before Colby even got the full question out, said, here are the rental car keys. Go do what you need to do. Yeah. And so he got to be in the hospital and kind of represent our family, because besides Brittany, Zach, and their parents living in Nashville, all the rest of the family lives in Springfield, Missouri. So it was going to be at least 7 to 8 hours before any of the rest of us could get to them. And Colby got there and was able to sit with Brittany and was there until their parents showed up. And then once he waited until they had talked to the doctors and got the news that he's alive. We think we've steadied him. Then Colby left and went back to work.
I think that and we'll come back to you here in a second, Zach. I think that it's a misconception whenever we, in these dark moments, we're very, very selfish, and we feel like nobody cares about us. And the truth is, people do care about us. People love us. And you felt that through Brittany's letter and Tiffany's emotion as she's reading it and the things that she has to say. But I want Tiffany to take one moment and talk to Zach as if, what did it mean? Like, had he died, like, what would that have done to you? You know, you speak of 3 people that was just alike, and it was your dad, Dan, you, and Zach. Like, for Zach to take that moment and just ball it up and hold it to himself because of that one loss, I know he wasn't thinking about you possibly losing 2 people. But I just want to see if you take one moment and just tell Zach what he means to you, and like if you would have lost him, what that would have done to you.
Oh boy, okay.
You ready for this?
No. Go ahead.
Neither am I. I have to think of where to start.
Take your time.
We're not a big family.
Cuss me out again if it makes you feel better.
Yeah, you're still a dumbass. We're not a big family. So I feel like we're all closer than, you know, the big, huge families that have all kinds of family members. There's not that many of us to keep up with. So for me personally, family means everything to me. As much as, you know, some of us may disagree or have our moments where we don't see eye to eye, we're all family, and that keeps everybody close to my heart. You, of course, I didn't talk to you that much. I mean, still, every now and then, but you were 8 hours away. But we'd still come to visit. I came to your high school graduation. You know, it's like I always tried to be there for you, even though I may not have communicated that the best. But when I found out what had happened, a part of me was right there in that hospital at that second, struggling to survive. Because you may have been a dumbass. But I love you, and I loved you then, I loved you now, or I love you now. It doesn't change anything. And I know that wasn't going through your head when the bullet was. Or when you were thinking about it. But everybody in the family was completely dumbstruck by the whole situation. None of us saw it coming. We were all so distraught. And I tried personally to make that clear to you, especially whenever I went to visit. I visited you when you were in the hospital. I visited whenever you had to be in the psychiatric ward for a little while. And I tried to make it very clear, I am always here for you to talk to. Whether I reach out or not, I'll always answer. Even Tarrance can attest to that. Anytime anybody reaches out to me, I'm always answering. Whether I want to or not, in some cases, I will always answer. I am just thankful that God and those doctors kept you with us. We all are. Because your mother happens to be the closest person to me in the family.
That's a scary thought.
And as strong as she may try to appear, she would have never been the same. And I know she's told you that.
That was beautiful. Thank you. How are you feeling?
Oh, this
You feel like, I know that Terrance
emotionally
put you
tortured.
on the spot right there.
Can we take a break for a minute?
Yeah, let's take a break. Thank you so much.
I need a break so I can punch Terrance.
Let's take a punching break. So maybe
I'll
we
just
can
give it a roll.
give you, Zach, like any reflection that you have to Tiffany on, kind of hearing what she just laid out.
Well, Tiffany, I love you. I'm more intimately aware of that now than I was back then. Since then, I have turned to you for advice and for help. That's how I ended up moving back to Springfield, was because you offered me your spare bedroom for like 7 years, and then I finally took it. And then you almost immediately regretted it, I'm sure. But
It wasn't immediately.
took 9 months, whatever. But that if you had said that to me, then none of that probably would have happened. But I was the dumbass, as you succinctly put it, that didn't reach out to anybody. So for that, I do want to say I'm sorry, because it shouldn't have ever even gotten to that point.
I'm sorry you didn't reach out, but you never know if that necessarily would have changed anything. It might not have changed how you were feeling in that moment. It might have, had you talked to all of the family or heard all the family's point of view, which you've heard now. But
Some of them I still don't want to hear.
But I think the takeaway from all of this for everybody is to never be afraid to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
And to hopefully never feel so alone that there's not anybody that you could actually talk to. I think most everybody has somebody in their life that they could reach out in that moment if they needed to, if they're capable of thinking that far out and not so far depressed that they can't think of that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I think reaching out helps anybody and everybody.
I agree. And I think that the sound of the shot was only heard by a few, possibly neighbors. But I think the pain of that bullet was felt all throughout your family. And I think that the heartfelt message you heard from Brittany and Tiffany kind of portrays that. But there's also a road to recovery that you had to go down. Most people think about what happens if I shoot myself or kill myself, but they don't think about the aftermath, that road. Could you explain how long and possibly dreadful or painful that may have been?
So there's two sides of that. Of course, there's the physical recovery, which is almost always going to be set in stone for a certain amount of time, and then there's the mental and emotional recovery, which in some ways I still feel like I'm still going through at certain points. The physical recovery, was 2-3 weeks in the hospital, followed by 2-3 weeks in Vanderbilt's psychiatric ward, which I don't want to get into if that's okay, because it's a long story that boils down to me being stubborn and finally having to give in and actually go to group therapy.
That's self-discovery though, right?
Yes, and I did end up making friends there once I did start going to the group therapy sessions, and they helped me a lot to kind of come out of my shell and admit that this had happened, and helped me realize that I was not alone in having those kinds of thoughts, and that there's people all over that have those kinds of thoughts. But then afterwards was the emotional side and whatnot. And part of what helped with that was going back to work. I pulled the trigger in May 2013. I didn't get back to work until almost November. It was like October 27th or something like that before I was finally able to start again. But before that, in like July or August, I remember I had my mom drive me up to my Wendy's I worked at, and I asked to see the general manager, and she came out, and I just asked her, what would it take for me to come back to work? I was expecting some sort of pushback based on, well, you know, a lot of people were not sure how they'll be able to work with you from this point on or stuff like that. But instead, all she asked was, when can you start? And I wasn't expecting that straightforward of an answer. Told her I still needed to make a trip up to Missouri once I had the tracheostomy and feeding tube removed, so I could go see all the family, like, you know, my favorite cousin Tiffany here. And, you know, and she said, okay, that's fine, just let me know. And so I let her know, and then I got back to work, and that first day she sat me down in the dining room, and we spent a good hour just talking about what had happened, how we wanted to move forward from it. You know, do we want the crew to be talking about it? Do we want it to be something that they can talk about with me, whatnot? And I said yes, and so just getting back out there into the world, meeting with people every day helped tremendously. You know, back before all this happened, Tiffany will tell you, I didn't talk to anybody. You could ask me a question, you'd be lucky to get more than a sentence out of me. I just wasn't a talkative person or a social person. But then nowadays, my dad described it as I could talk the ears off of a brick wall. Because I just don't shut up. I don't stop talking. And I think Wendy's helped out with that a lot. And then nowadays I work for a call center, and something else that helped me to recover was just the drive to move up in my job, so that in the period of something like 6 months, I did what was supposed to take me 2 years. You know,
Accomplishments, amazing.
and it was just a matter of, I took the time frames they give me and threw them out the window and said, let me get it. You know, they offered a class. I said, I'll take the class. And then they offered me to move to a different division, and I said, I'll do this. And, you know, they needed people to fill the spots, and so they didn't care about tenure at that point. So they said, all right, you're in. And that's how I got to where I'm at now, and I'm possibly going to be moving again in the company, which fingers crossed for that. But now just moving up through there helped me out a lot. And of course, I've made lots of friends at work, just being my social self, which 10 years ago I never thought I'd describe myself that way, but here we are.
So of course you're going to get the promotion. I mean, you've come this far and you've overcome a lot. But one thing I felt like you just kind of bypassed, you moved it all here, and I wanted to expand on it just a little bit. So there was no pain? Did you not feel any pain at all after you shot yourself?
If I did, I don't remember it.
No, in the hospital during your recovery.
Like, so in the hospital, they had me on pain meds the whole time, to the point where I don't even remember them ever saying I was on them. But I do remember, I remember people telling me that I'm no longer allowed to take Loratab because it would give me hallucinations.
Did you have headaches for a while?
No.
Sinus problems?
No.
When your teeth shift, did you have to have braces?
So my jaw was wired shut, and I still have the plates and screws from that because they couldn't remove those. But by the time that my jaw was unwired, we'll say, I couldn't tell a difference because my mouth had been closed for so long. I was just thankful that I could open my mouth again and actually eat real food and not the full liquid diet I had been on with the feeding tube.
And is that where the scar is here?
So this is the tracheostomy. This was from when they wired my jaw shut so that they could operate on it all and put it back together. This was so I could breathe. And then the feeding tube was down here, which I'm not going to show that to y'all because, you know, but it was just so that I could have some sort of nutrition pumped into me, basically, since I couldn't eat at the time. And then But other than that, there wasn't really any pain other than them taking the feeding tube out. The tracheostomy came out without problem. I didn't even realize it was out when they did it. The feeding tube, however, she said she'd count to 3. She counted to halfway through 2, and then just yanked it. And I went from, oh, that's it, that wasn't so bad, to, oh God, I'm about to die. Just that fast. Because it hit all at once. I'm pretty sure I broke my mom's hand during that. But she took it like a trooper and didn't say nothing. She swore she was fine, so I have to believe her. But yeah, that was the only pain I really remember, is them taking the feeding tube out.
Well, I'm curious, because you have the scar, and you kind of touched on, like, when you were going back to work, like, how you guys wanted to talk about it. And I'm wondering, like, do a lot of people ask you about it? And when they do, or if they do, or if this comes up too, like, do you think it's good to talk about, right? Because I feel like a big thing about suicide is, should we talk about it? Should we not talk about it? It's this taboo in our society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where some people are afraid if we talk about it, then it will be, like, contagious, right? But then if you don't talk about it, then that suffering continues and that isolation gets worse, not just for the people who do it, but also for the family members who don't get to express their grief and all of that. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in yours too, Tiffany, like on talking about suicide, and again, just kind of if you get a lot of people asking.
So for me, it kind of depends on how long I've known the person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a coworker when I first started where I'm at now that we had known each other, which is say we were in the same class for a couple weeks when she asked me about it, and she thought it was from me having seizures. So she just wanted to make sure that, there wouldn't be anything needed, in case that was the case. I told her it wasn't for that, it was tracheostomy, and I told her I wasn't quite comfortable with sharing what had happened because for complete strangers, I am somewhat embarrassed about it. It's not exactly something I just want to have stamped to my forehead. Hey, I attempted suicide. Don't ask me about it. That'd be even weirder. So I just don't want to advertise it necessarily. But after another couple weeks getting to know her, I finally told her what happened, and it's one of those things that if people ask me about it, I will tell them, assuming I feel like they can be trusted with the information and not go crazy with it and try to use it against me or anything like that.
Right.
But if it's just a complete stranger, I just tell them I had tracheostomy. I told them I was in an accident and that my face got messed up, and so in order to put my face back together, they had to cut a hole in here so I could breathe, which is mostly the truth.
So when you do, feel comfortable to share, what is a helpful response that people can have if they are curious to talk to somebody about suicide?
I mean, most people that I've talked to about it, they really, the word choice here is hard. Best way I could put it was that they kind of sober up a lot of the times, because they usually ask it just out of like a curiosity thing, and then they hear about it and then they're just like, oh, are you okay? And that's, I'm always just like, I'm all right now, I promise. The worst thing that they could do when first hearing about it would be to brush it off as if it was nothing. Because while I brush it off with humor, that's my coping mechanism. But at the same time, I understand it was a serious thing that happened. I use humor as a coping mechanism, not as a, escape from reality, if that makes sense. Yeah. Anybody that would hear about it and not take it seriously is probably the worst kind of person to me. Because that tells me that they just don't care at all about the struggles I've had, and if they didn't care about something that made me want to kill myself, they're not going to care about just the hardships I'm going through right now that they might be able to help with.
I almost think that's almost like comparison to let's say if somebody's face is dismembered, and you know how if you're talking to them, you won't look at them, you'll look past them or look around, but you won't look at them. And it's like they're looking at you, ignore them, and it's kind of like that with the confronting of the suicide. But even in your family, do y'all talk about suicide now? Like Clearie was asking earlier, is that a topic in your family now, or not at all? It's like hush. Nobody mentions suicide.
Oh, no, it's not hush. It's not something we talk about all the time because it's depressing. Yeah. But we definitely talk about it, and our family has a sick sense of humor, so we'll make jokes every now and then just to lighten the mood about it.
I make the worst ones.
But we have all expressed our feelings and, how much we would have missed Zach had he been successful. Yeah. And how scary it was for everybody.
And do you feel like a failure because of that? Because she said, had you been successful, do you feel like you failed at it?
So the way I would describe it, there's a meme that I've seen that was like a computer error pop-up. It says, task failed successfully. That's how I think of it. It's just like,
absolutely,
I failed what I was going for, but in doing so, I actually succeeded, if that makes sense. So, like, I was trying to do the wrong thing, I failed to do the wrong thing, and in doing so, I did the right thing. I would never think of myself as being a failure because I wasn't able to kill myself. I might have made jokes about it at one time or another, but that doesn't necessarily mean I actually felt that way. It was more just me trying to lighten the mood with people, because as she said, we have a sick sense of humor. It's bad sometimes. There's some things I've said that would make my mother cry, in the frame of a joke, and so it's just how we are, but at the same time, we all understand it's just our sense of humor.
So me and Tiffany talked the other day, as we were discussing this recording. Our perspective was this: isn't it crazy how God saved Zach? And like, what do you mean? She was like, yo, it's crazy. He was at home by himself. Sister wasn't there. Aunt was gone. And a manager came and knocked on the door. You shot yourself in the head by yourself. And in our mind, but God. Like, only person that could do something like that is God that could save you. Somebody that was writing a note on your car to basically tell you you're fired if you don't come to work is knocking on your door. And you had the wrong mindset to walk upstairs, get your phone, call your mom, and your neighbor just happened to be home. And everything worked out right. You died twice. Back twice. 10 cans of Mountain Dew. 10 whole, but God, and then you had that bullet, looking at the scar up under your chin, had that bullet did anything probably different, had you not woke up and passed out and tried to clean yourself up, and had you just stayed in the car and she's knocking at the door, you wouldn't be, any part of that had changed, you wouldn't be here. And we're just talking about God just, and as Brittany said, God, you have a story. And we contribute that to God. But then a few years ago, I talked to you. Do you contribute it to God?
So, this is kind of a sore subject for me. I don't attribute it necessarily to the Christian God. I do believe there's a higher power out there, because I'm agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that there is a higher power that intervened there and kept me alive in whatever way needed to happen, or multiple ways, I guess. That said, I don't pretend to know what that higher power's plans for me might be. I don't plan to presume to know the thoughts of things that are, that much more powerful than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I believe that a higher power was involved, I don't pretend to know why or what it was. I just know that they had a reason that they wanted me to still be here.
And that's the beauty I see in this, because we would contribute it to Jehovah, to Jesus, to, somebody contributed to, Mary or whatever it is. And you're just saying, like, I'm here. There's something up there. I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here. And even though your point of view is I'm here, we can see our faith in you. Like, there's faith. Mm-hmm. There's a scenario if God can do it for you, who don't even believe or not sure what to believe. In our mind, God can definitely do it for us. So the second part of that question was, me personally, I've had bouts with suicide, and people tend to think that because you do it one time, it's like, whoo, like he's healed. It's over, it's done. And that wasn't the case. And I've gone my struggles, I had my bouts, I had my thought process. I've gone through therapy, I've talked to different people. So I wanted to ask you, was that the only time that you ever thought about it, since you actually did it? Because I'm standing on the cliff with the gun to my head in my room for 3 days by myself in Springfield, Missouri, not too far from where Tiffany lived, getting ready to kill myself. And something stopped me. But in my mind, there's always that, like, what if? Mm-hmm. Like, what if I pulled the trigger? Would I be here? Or my son Jackson wouldn't be here? Or I may have survived. I have no idea what would my life be like then. So my question to you is, did that stop you, or?
So to answer that the way I think you initially were meaning to phrase it, yes, I have tried again since. Tiffany, I don't think you've actually heard about this. It was the night before I called you to ask about your spare room. You know how bad I was then. Mm-hmm. The short version is that I had a whole new load of stressors on, between loss of my job and some relationship drama that I don't feel like getting into right now. And it felt like I was in an even darker place than I was when I had the gun. And so then one night, I remember this time I actually wrote a note to the people I was living with and left it up on my computer where they would be able to see it when they found me. And I took a plastic bag and put it over my head, tied the knot and whatnot, and thought, okay, this is going to be the end. But then, as I'm struggling to breathe from that point forward, like, the clarity came in of, wait, I don't actually want to do this. So then I practically punched myself in the face in order to make a hole in the bag to let air in. And, ripped the bag off, tore it off, whatnot, just threw it away. And then, went, deleted the note I had written, shut down the computer, started packing my stuff up. And then the next morning, I moved back to my parents' house, and that evening I called my cousin Tiffany here and asked her if I could still take up that spare room, because I knew I needed to get away from the situation I was in, because it was the reason that I was thinking those thoughts. And so staying there was not going to help me none. And so then I, a week later, I moved into your place.
Pretty
and
quick.
A couple weeks after that, I started the job that I still have now. And ever since then, I've been so much better. Wow. Everybody in my life can tell a difference between when I moved up here and how I am now.
Wow.
Another part of the show is just, for a wide audience, like, if there are people out there who might be going through something similar, like, any advice that you would offer, really?
The way I would say it is that if you're having dark thoughts like that, where you feel like you're not worth anything to anybody, or that, everyone would be better off without you, take a moment and either think to yourself, which can be difficult, what do people actually value about me? And if you're struggling to find an answer to that, then ask somebody that you feel close to and you can trust. Maybe don't structure it as, hey, I'm contemplating ending my life, because that's going to send them into panic mode. But then just ask them, hey, what is it you like about me and value about me? Because I'm not really seeing it right now, and it's kind of making myself miserable here. Is there anything that you think of that you only get from me, or that you really appreciate that you get from me? Stuff like that. Because me personally, I'm a people pleaser. So I almost entirely measure my value on the way others value me. Even though that sounds like it's self-destructive and whatnot, it's just how I am. I want to be helping people constantly. And so that's why when I was originally having those dark thoughts, it's because a lot of it was that I felt like I wasn't doing well at my job, and how I was putting unnecessary stress on my parents by still having to support me. And, yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. There's a whole bunch of, I feel like I'm failing everybody else. And so I wasn't seeing the good that I was doing for other people.
Yeah. And I would even go a step further, and say that, like the book, the concept in the book, find the top 3 people in your life. Because let's say a scenario where a girl is having an argument with her boyfriend, and she's like, what do I mean to you? And he's mad. And he's like, says the wrong things, and then she wants to go kill herself. So I would tell her, if I could, at that moment, to go ask 2 more people, whoever the top 3 people in your life. So you're not just getting one perspective from somebody that may be mad, because there's other people that love you. Even though that person loves you, their anger or their, fear or whatever may be taking over, and they may not be giving you the true concept of their heart. And that can be confusing to somebody that's trying to please somebody, right? But yeah, just find the top 3 people in your life to ask that question, and then you can, get the sum of it to see your value, I think. But yeah, I definitely think that today has been an amazing session that we've had with you. The enlightenment of near death, thinking about death, and as me and Tiffany say, how God, put his hand on you, on your life, and the view that people are hearing. You survived. You're here, survived. And you told me, prior in talking, that there was a switch that happened. You was really depressed before you pulled the trigger, and then after you pulled the trigger, coming out, you realized that people love you, that the people were there to support you, and you had value, even though you had another bout later, and you're gonna continue to have bouts. But I think it's very important that you continue to open up and speak to your outlets, and be pure with your heart, and telling her hey, I'm struggling, can you help me? And she says, hey, I got a room, and that saved you. And as you continue to go throughout your future, and me too, and anybody else that is going through this scenario, just know that your village loves you, that we're always here to support you, and that your story is amazing, regardless of the journey that you're on, the pressure that you feel, and the way that you're looking at your life. Because there is a different outlook or perspective that others see. Because from what we're seeing here, you're the strong individual that overcame something that most people can't. You went round and round, bout by bout with, depression. Suicide, that is huge. Huge. So when I heard that this story existed and that you're still alive, I contact Tip. I'm like, I need the story. I need to talk to the person that survived. In my mind, I can see God's hand all over you. And one thing that I wanted to do was to, one, tell you that I'm proud and that you're an amazing person, and that I'm glad that you're here. The same emotion that Tip felt when she looked into your eyes is the same emotion that we feel when we look at you too. You're loved, you're valued, and we see you.
Thank you.
Yeah. But definitely, again, thank you for tuning in for Face to Face with Tarrance Weaver. If anybody is having these type of thoughts, they do have suicidal hotlines that you can call. I don't actually have the number now, but we're definitely posted on the bottom of our screen here. And remember that we love you. You're not alone. God bless.